and the mover of the anti-homosexuality bill, which later became an act. As the doctor has said, we want to use this platform to provide the context to what is happening in the country and the world as a result of what happened in Parliament when we enacted the anti-homosexuality law. There are about 3 or 4 aspects that I'll be highlighting. The first aspect relates to the communication by the World Bank. Now, the communication by the World Bank has 2 major issues that need to be highlighted. The first issue relates to their decision to suspend loan facilities to Uganda. And in their letter, or in their communication, they state that this law will fundamentally undermine the health rights of Ugandans. This law is discriminatory, and this law is non-inclusive. It's exclusive in nature. Now, I want to address that specifically because by making that statement, the World Bank, in effect, is expressing lack of knowledge of this law. What does the law state? And I want to invite you, colleagues of the media, to find time and address your minds to Section 14 on the duty to disclose. Section 14 of the law does not create an offense arising out of failure to disclose acts of homosexuality. There is no offense. It only places a duty on Ugandans to report acts of homosexuality to police for appropriate action. Now, what happens if you don't report? You don't commit an offense. Now, that civic duty is derived from our Constitution. The Constitution of the Republic of Uganda places a duty, a civic duty, on every Ugandan to report acts of crime. Now, fortunately, that duty, omission of that duty, does not place criminal liability on anybody. Now, when you look at the statement by the World Bank, it is creating an impression that every Ugandan will have committed an offense if they don't report acts of homosexuality. That is wrong. And that's where our problem is. Either there is deliberate distortion, misinformation, or lack of ignorance, I mean total ignorance in as far as this law is concerned. Now, where does it criminalize failure to report? And we have consensus on this. Section 14 says, if you get to know acts of homosexuality and they've been committed on a child or a vulnerable person, then you commit an offense. And who is a vulnerable person? Again, the Act explains or defines who a vulnerable person is. A person that needs special care and assistance as a result of their age, sex, physical or mental incapacitation, disability, asylum seekers, refugees, internally displaced persons, and the like. Those are vulnerable people. So the law is saying where acts of homosexuality are committed on vulnerable people and you get to know about it and you don't report, you commit an offense. Now, this particular provision is actually a departure from my original proposition, because my original proposal was to make everybody responsible. But the middle ground was that no. Responsibility should be limited to failure to disclose where a person is engaged with acts of homosexuality with children or with vulnerable people. Now, when you look at the communication by the World Bank, they don't seem to appreciate that point. And I thought we would put it into context. The second aspect relates to undermining health rights or discrimination. Again, another misconception or deliberate distortion by the World Bank. In this country, where health rights are concerned, people are not asked about their sexual orientation or gender or anything. And I'll give a practical example. If a person is found on the street grabbing maybe a phone, and that person is shot at, and they are taken to Mulago or another medical facility, the doctors on site only have one duty to treat that person. They are not even supposed to ask where and how they were shot. But these are criminals. They could be criminals. You have seen criminals being arrested, shot at, taken to hospital. They are treated before they face justice. So nowhere in this country are people asked their sexual orientation before they access medical care. Nowhere. And if a medical officer did it, they will be actually undermining the Hippocratic Oath. So again, the World Bank makes a very deliberate misconception as far as we are concerned, to try and create an impression that when people who are gay or perceived to be gay go to health facilities, they were going to be denied medical care on account of their sexual orientation. That does not happen. It does not happen. It has not happened anywhere in this country. And it will not happen because that in itself will be against our laws. That a medical officer, a doctor or a nurse will ask people's orientation before they are given health care, that in itself will offend our constitution. So again, the World Bank should be well advised that in this country, sexual orientation, gender, or any other orientation you want to call it, is not a prerequisite for access of medical facilities anywhere. It's not a prerequisite. The bill does not say so. I mean, this act does not say so, neither does our constitution state so. So you'd expect ordinarily that an institution like the World Bank, that is heavily facilitated with the legal personnel, health personnel, understands this basic fact. Because the bill, the act, has been structured in very simple language. So this act does not in any way undermine health rights of any Ugandan in that regard. The other aspect is the broader aspect of discrimination. Because the World Bank says this bill is discriminatory. It promotes discrimination. Let me also emphasize this, that the grounds of discrimination in this country have been established in our constitution. Somebody may not be discriminated against on the basis of age, sex, gender, tribe. Now, sexual orientation in our constitution is not one of the grounds of discrimination. In other words, our constitution has closed what we call discrimination. And you cannot import an aspect in the constitution outside what the constitution has stated. So the World Bank cannot import, because sexual orientation, and you see why I'm emphasizing this, there is a very big difference between sex and sexual orientation. In our constitution, the constitution emphasizes discrimination on the basis of sex, but not sexual orientation. And Uganda is not a signatory to any international treaty, protocol, covenant, concordant that says sexual orientation is a ground of discrimination. We are not party to any treaty in that regard. And we are not about to be parties to any treaty that says so, because in effect, it will be contradicting our constitution. Because already our constitution outlaws same-sex marriages. So I thought that must also be contextualized. Finally, on my part, on the World Bank letter, it quotes values No, this is the second last point. It quotes values. The letter by the World Bank says, according to World Bank's values. And I think they are right to quote their values. But where does that leave the values of Ugandans? And who told the World Bank that their values are our values? Definitely they cannot be. So if we are partners, then it means you must accommodate values of all constituent parties in the World Bank agreement. So you cannot be citing your values and leaving out the values of those who are partners in your services. So you are talking about, and by the way, World Bank's values are not universal. They are not. And we have had a debate of what we call cultural relativism. When we are trying to talk about the universality of human rights, there is the concept of cultural relativism. So the World Bank in their letter is citing values. If you read the letter, it says, according to the World Bank's values, what about the values of Uganda and Ugandans? I thought that should have been put into context. But finally, and more importantly on my part, is the aspect of World Bank. World Bank in itself is sounding to be very contradictory. Yes, the loan facilities, the loan programs have had a tremendous effect on what I call socio-economic rights. But with due respect, the World Bank has no mandate over what we would call political rights, and that is in their own documents. Their own documents. That's why people are concerned at the treatment of, gay rights at the expense of other rights. They were very clear themselves in their agreement, very keen to avoid or very slow to enter into internal political processes and rights of the partners. Very clear. And we see this as a demonstration in that line. So we think that World Bank may be having other reasons for suspending loan facilities, but not related to this law. Not related to this law. Because if it was related to this law, they would not be giving the reasons they have given in their communication. Because the reasons they have given in their communication are completely at variance with what the law actually says. So maybe they should come out openly. Be open, be very clear as to why they are suspending loan facilities to Uganda. They should not use the law. They should not use the anti-homosexuality law, because the relationship between their suspension and the law is completely not there. So I thought we would give that context and relate it to the communication that was issued by the World Bank. I'll, in the meantime, leave it at that.